Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Idea to Value podcast. I'm your host, Nick Skillicorn, and I'm thrilled to have with us today Donna Loughlin. Donna is the CEO and founder of LMG PR, and she's known for her work with futurists and innovators around the world, constructing narratives and storytelling to really get the message that you want to get out there as effectively as possible. Donna, it's wonderful having you here today.
Oh, thank you so much, Nicholas, and congratulations on 100 plus episodes.
It's a lot more than that at the moment, depending on when you're dialing in from. But yeah, it's been a good journey, and obviously the highlight's always speaking with interesting people like yourself.
Yeah, well, definitely podcasting is a labor of love.
Welcome to the Idea to Value podcast, where in every episode we highlight the latest insights into creativity and innovation from experts around the world. I'm your host, Nick Skillicorn. I care about the evidence behind what makes ideas happen, and I've already helped thousands of people just like you through my unique insights into recent scientific findings of how creativity works. I also show you how to turbocharge innovation programs so they finally deliver on the value and ideas you've been struggling to execute. Get your free training on how creativity can be improved by registering now at www.ideatovalue.com. Now let's get on with today's episode. So, Donna, for people who don't know about you and the work that you do, could you just give them a brief background as to where you got started and how you got to where you are now?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a native of California, but I have actually have more than 5 passports that I've retired. And really early on, I started traveling extensively out of my zip code, out of my comfort zone in many cases. And that led to my personal discovery to want to become a international news reporter. So I worked for Reuters International, which is now Thomson Reuters. I also worked for the Washington Post and for the BBC. And with those personal experiences and working in business and economics ultimately led me to technology, back to the Valley where I came from, which is surprisingly that you come back to your roots. But I realized that it was kind of a happy accident to be born amongst the not just the original fruit trees and apricots, but from the budding Apple computers and HPs and eventually the Googles and Twitters of the world. That global experience actually brought me back to the core where I can add the most value.
And tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing nowadays.
Yeah, so 20 years ago, hard to believe, celebrated 20 years in the midst of the pandemic, and I don't think anyone even blinked, but 20 years anniversary with LMG PR, which stands for Leadership, Momentum, and Growth, which is a strategic public relations agency that focuses on working with emerging markets and technologists. And so with that said, I get to work with some of the most amazing innovations and products that most of us won't see on the shelves or on the streets for another, 2 to 10 years in some places. So that is robotics, autonomous, artificial intelligence, IoT products, things that with 2 wheels, things with 4 wheels, things that fly. And so my goal and my job working with the innovators and the futurists is really creating a narrative that brings these products to market for businesses and consumers in a tangible way that it's a meaningful product and innovation, not something that is disruptive or disrupting our life. So really about adopting and adapting and ensuring that the story that is being told when bringing products to market is something that's authentic and that you and I are personally going to embrace.
And it's this concept of storytelling that I'm looking forward to speaking with you about today, especially when it comes to the extremes of storytelling and getting the authentic, true message out there. So let's take it back to the types of companies that you're working with, very high technology companies. I often see a lot of these companies trying to market themselves and their products very factually. This is the number of megahertz it has. This is the capacity. This is the features. Why is that not a very effective method to get in touch with the end consumer?
Yeah, I have a name for that. I call it high-tech poetry or just alphabet soup, which doesn't necessarily mean anything to people like you and I who are going to be making the decision. I think if you go, I'll use transportation as an example. If you go look at new cars, I love cars. Anyone who knows me knows I like fast cars and fast motorcycles, and And if you look at some in a technology like a Tesla, when it first came to market, it wasn't the first autonomous car. It wasn't the first smart car. There were other cars in the market, but I think what Tesla created was the mystique of the innovation and technology becoming something that was solving a problem. And so congestion in traffic and the need for people to be connected, but in a means that's not going to disrupt their driving. And so when I look at new technologies, emerging markets, I need to go through a whole discovery process. And oftentimes it starts on a napkin or it's at a whiteboard with the engineering and engineering and core founding team. And we look at everything that in the market that currently exists and look at where the opportunities are for us to augment that conversation. So is it relevant? How relevant? Is it, what are the kind of the out of the box and unique components of the technology or platform? And then really listening to the market and what the consumer needs, because this consumer needs and what a company actually creates sometimes are not exactly what you and I want. And so when you talk about speeds and feeds and just the how it works versus why, that's where the audience and the consumers like you and I, that's where we get left behind.
Now, you mentioned as well that you need to be careful about disruption and disrupting people. I think Silicon Valley is the hotbed of companies that are actively trying to disrupt the world. Is that not the right way to go about it when you're trying to connect with the audience?
The word disruption, I think, has gotten to be so overused. I'm trying to come up with a new word, but I do think there is a little bit of what I call ego engineering versus innovation. And ego engineering is, and I'm not going to list any names, but you can read any of the headline news in technology and new products. And even in the latest movie, Don't Look Up, the persona of if you've not seen that movie, I recommend seeing it because there's a lead character in the movie that it literally is a mashup of tech. Of tech leaders. He's like one part Elon Musk, he's one part Steve Jobs, he's one part Tim Cook. And it's like, wow, this is interesting because I think I've met each one of these people in my travels. And for us to be able to adopt to technology, it also means that we need to learn to adapt. And so looking at things that you and I, like our headphones that we have on, or our smart computers or iPad or whatever smart device we might be using to communicate, those were once crazy ideas that were on a whiteboard. But we've all learned to adapt and adopt these innovations over time. Ego engineering to me, is taking, I have a product and I believe that this product is great for everybody. And maybe it's not, right? Maybe it's not so great. The innovation is where I think products actually take that next form, which is this is a product that's so innovative that's actually going to benefit mankind. So there's a lot of discussions around sustainability and climate change and electric vehicles. And so that's a market I look at very closely because you can look at that market, you can say, okay, where is the ego engineering here? And ego engineering could be things like I'm walking down a street near Stanford University and all of a sudden a autonomous car nearly hits me, which truly did happen a few years ago. I don't think that's such a great idea. It's probably not meant to be on the road quite yet, but that innovation could be really invaluable in places in different applications, such as in large, campuses, such as in agriculture, or corporate campuses where we don't have people going to the office every day, but you need autonomous security robots to be patrolling. And I actually work with a company that creates that type of product. And so there's security robots, but one of their models it literally is on 4 wheels and it patrols. To me, that's an innovation. That's not ego engineered. It has a real purpose. And if you go to big box stores, like a computer electronics store, any place in the world, you're going to see both. You're going to see products that are like, wow, I need this. It's going to help make my life easier. It's going to augment my productivity or performance or just for entertainment. And then you can just see other products that you're just going, why did somebody create this? And I think we just need to go through a selection process of what you might consider to be great, I might not consider to be so great.
I think the question is also within the company, what people are hoping to design for the future and what other departments want to be able to take to the market and sell. A while back, I had a podcast interview with one of the gentlemen who first developed the Bose noise cancelling earphones, one of the first, if not the first, noise cancelling earphones on the market. And from a technological perspective, these things were really ahead of their time. And that frustrated some of the departments within the company, especially the marketing and sales department, because they were given a product that had a very clear benefit for the end customer. But it was so different from what the company had previously sold that the marketing guys and the salespeople didn't really know how to start or where to go, or they would have preferred something a bit more comfortable and closer to the status quo of what they knew would sell well.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because what you just described, I think, became a cultural or office, upset. People tuning in personally, but tuning out to their surroundings within their coworkers. I use Bose headphones because I love the quality, but a better application than tuning out within your work culture and eliminating collaboration, which I think is key, is I fly. And I have Bose headsets, and I've tried many as a pilot, and they are the best. So there are certain applications where you do want to tune everything out. You want to make sure you can hear air traffic control, that you're totally situationally aware of your surroundings, and you can communicate with somebody else's in the plane. So to me, taking that innovation and technology and then applying it into something that's extremely, beneficial, I think is the importance of that evolution cycle, and not being part of the alphabet soup, but being part of that real world scenario and application.
Now, let's take this concept of storytelling. You've talked about it a couple of times. You've talked about shaping a narrative. What in your mind is a way to go about storytelling, or the way to find a narrative that actually connects with an audience?
Well, I typically start with anybody. We can have this conversation live. Is let's go back to your childhood, and let's go back to your childhood and that sense of wonderment and curiosity when everything is new for the first time, and you've never seen. I'm going to use a car again as a transportation, but in this case, it's a flying car. And so I described to you that I'm going to bring to market a flying car, and you're like, wow, okay, why do I need a flying car? But when you're a child, your creativity was off the charts. You probably drew, or perhaps you drew a flying car or other flying things. And so if you're the creator of this flying car, I'm going to take you back to that, try to get you before you got your doctorate, before you went to engineering school, before you studied aerospace, before you got your pilot's license, to what was that first sense of purpose and wonderment that you saw? Because oftentimes going back in that journey, that people forget, they file things in the back of their head, and they pull from that, which ultimately becomes that source, or what I call the chosen moment, where you decide, I'm going to change the world by creating this particular product or solution. And there was something that was cause driven, perhaps, but just filed away. And I find that probably 9 out of 10 times in working with the futurists and innovators, that there was something very early on in their preteen period of their life that they filed away. And I'll give you another example. I was working with the 2 brothers that created a remote automotive tire service. And one of the brothers forgot, and when he was in college, about the accident that he had that clearly was caused by bad tires. Now, it was a pretty significant accident, and he probably purposely wanted to put it out of his mind. But 10 years later, he was creating a company, and he didn't even realize, and kind of forgot, because he had buried it into his consciousness, that there was something that actually was something that we can grab and hang on to. And so that discovery process is really important. And just looking at the individual experience and the discovery, and going back to their childhood, and then where we are in the marketplace and the problem that we're is being solved. If we don't have a problem that we're in to solve, then that's where I say it's kind of the ego engineered. And I get calls a lot from people that have, I always say it's the Inspector Gadget moment, where they're open up their trench coat and there's all these ideas. And some of them are great, and some of them are just going, I don't know, do we need that? Don't we already have that? And a mousetrap is a mousetrap, but to actually make a mousetrap better, there has to be some thoughtfulness into the process, right? So I had somebody call me recently that had a better mousetrap, and it really was a mousetrap that would actually free the mouse and let the mouse be released into the wild again. And I'm thinking, I don't know. I have a wire fox terrier. My dog will probably just take care of that for me. But I think that sense of wonderment, and I think this is why Steve Jobs was so brilliant when he brought products to market, is he showcased that curiosity and that moment of discovery with that he personally had, not only his own personal experience, but the user group and the development group and the community and the extended community and culture that was created with that company is something I don't think we should take lightly. And being able to know that your customers are behind you, and your customers ultimately over time are going to speak up and demand, more.
Now, when you're talking about these moments, there's, in my mind, two ways that you could go. Either you can describe the moments and describe the story of the company and of the product, very much sort of pushed out from the company, or you can try to trigger these moments in the audience, to have them pull those moments into you. As you described, think back to the time when you were a child and you drew flying cars. That's something about the person receiving it, the individual. Am I right in that assessment? Is there one direction which you think is more effective than the other, or how do you think about that?
Yeah, it's interesting because not everybody is open to go down that path. So I have to find out if there's, sometimes it's a sport, right? It's not their childhood, or it's an individual, that a professor or a family member or somebody that kind of sparked the need to create something. I have a niece who works for Volvo, and she's a safety engineer, and she created a crash test dummy. Her inspiration for creating that dummy, although she was a PhD student, wasn't just because she needed a PhD product. It was because she actually had a classmate who lost her mother and wanted to improve the. Volvo was known for their safety, but this is before she was hired by Volvo. She wanted to improve the safety of having multiple passengers in the car. In particular, this case was an unborn child, and so I think people pull from either that particular moment in time and influenced by somebody, or oftentimes their surroundings. And I described early on, I'm from Silicon Valley, what wasn't called Silicon Valley, it was called the Land of Heart's Delight, which is, sounds very magical, but it was agriculture. And I left and I traveled the world and I came back. And because of all the, like a collector crab, all the different experiences I had culturally, internationally, I take those experiences and I bring them back into my dialogue so that I'm not just looking at things one dimensionally, and be able to abstract that content. And it's a little like connecting dots, right? The dot to dot. I haven't done one of those in years where, children connect the dots and they come up with some type of character or object. And that's what storytelling is really about, is make that connecting the dots so that your story is authentic, it's relevant, and that it actually has some stamina, meaning that it can actually build momentum and be agile, and things that can offset a product in a company's position, or sometimes things that we can't control. The things we can't control are natural disasters, things like the pandemic, those types of things. But the things that we can control are a consumer interaction and consumer behavior, consumer buying to a degree. Holiday season, there's this nomenclature, Christmas in July, which is not a joke. That's when the consumer electronics markets buy. and purchase products. I just came back from CES, and the largest consumer electronics show in Las Vegas. And it was interesting to see, and not very populated this year, but it was interesting to see the products that were selected. There were a lot of consumer personal computing products, but there are also a lot of products that you and I could not put in our pocket, such as, in transportation and home appliances and things like that. But I did stand back and look at each one of those products and say, do I need this? And it's not a one size fits all product or process, but it has to start with what is the problem that we're solving, and not just creating a product and then finding a market. And that's the hard part. Oftentimes people will create a product and say, let's find a market. I love working with the futurists and the visionaries that are actually thinking, you know what, I'm going to put everything on the line. I'm going to mortgage my house. I'm going to sell my car. I'm going to walk to work. I'm going to downgrade from a dog to a goldfish, or whatever it takes, because they're so convicted. They have so much conviction that they actually want to change something. And so maybe it's a product that's going to be environmentally friendly, or it's going to save somebody's life. But that's really the heart and soul of, I think, of a real visionary and futurist, and capturing that story.
I feel sorry for the dog that's getting downgraded, but let's move on to
downgrade to a fish. Fish is a little easier to take care of if you're working 72
Absolutely.
hours straight.
So I want to pick up on one thing you mentioned there, and that's finding the authenticity in the story. And one of the main topics I'd like to talk to you about today is truth in storytelling and authenticity, because especially when it comes to marketing, and especially when it comes to people trying to figure out a story that might go viral or might pull on someone's heartstrings, there can quite often be a temptation to see how far you can push the story to get the end result that you want. And one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about it is today, if you go back to Idea to Value and see which articles I wrote, you'll see an article called something along the lines of what 8 wet, cold monkeys can tell us about lies in storytelling. And there's a very common story being told in the innovation circles about monkeys training each other that there's danger, even though they never experienced it themselves. And they quote this research study from the 60s. I went back and found that research study, and the study itself doesn't say that at all. It says completely the opposite. But the story that people tell is the one that gets the best reaction from the audience. So either have you ever come across companies or individuals in your time that wanted to tell a story that wasn't really that authentic, or that was really stretching the truth as far as it could go? And how did you handle that?
Yeah, I actually inherited one. It was really interesting, because I do think there's a difference between storytelling and narrative and myths. And in this case, it was a little bit of an urban myth about the authentic back end story of the reason why a product was being brought to market. And during my investigative journalistic process, I like to do audits, and I like to talk to customers. I like to talk to the engineering. I like to talk to the investors. I like to talk to a whole gamut. In this case, I actually went all the way back, and I spoke to prior labs where the individual had worked, and found out that there were components of the product that were in the product that was proposed to come to market that were actually under a patent infringement. Well, clearly I can't represent and work with somebody that is going to infringe a point of patent. So I declined that opportunity because it just would have not been right. It wouldn't be the right thing to do. And falsifying and coming out with something that's so magically unbelievable, and then knowing that legally that somebody could come back substantiated facts. And it's like a little like Wikipedia. Wikipedia is all about the facts. So you can start a Wikipedia page, and I can go in and I can tag something, and somebody else goes in and they add something. But the minute it becomes a little too advertorial, it's gone. And I think that's the key is to know the difference between the good stuff and the fluff. And I think the key, and I'll have to go read your piece because I did not read that piece, is that I think we all need to be conscious and ask the questions too, and question things. Like I look at packaging. I actually read the how-to manuals, and before we're such a high expectation culture, and since that people have been conditioned to just take things out of the box and they work as advertised. Well, they don't always work as advertised, right? But I seldom have had. That's really, I can only pinpoint to one experience where there was something that I couldn't represent because I couldn't believe the back end story enough to shape it. For the most part, people come from a place of passion and sincerity that they ultimately believe that what they're creating and bringing to market is more than the sum of its parts in a box. I worked with larger companies over the years, publicly traded companies, and oftentimes products come to market that they just need to rival the competition, or it's through an acquisition, and you describe kind of the Bose experience, is that sometimes products become a Me Too product because maybe the innovation has been surpassed by something else, and that's fine. I don't work with those types of companies. I work with the ones that are really shaping kind of the next generation. What the millennials want and what the Zoomers are going to demand is ultimately the market space that I work in.
I'm sure that you've got, with your background in journalism, with Reuters and the BBC and other outlets, a different perspective on this hunt for truth and accuracy and making sure that what you're putting out there into the world is actually true, compared to maybe some people who have more of a pure marketing, how can we get engagement on these subjects as their prerogative?
Yeah, well, I do think coming from a journalism background, and it was instilled in me fairly young. I mean, even before I went to college, but I was writing a lot, and I was by the time I was out of college, I already done 3 internships, and I was exposed to the real world and the real fact checking, and it becomes part of the DNA and Common Course. But I think we should be asking questions in everything that we do, not just in products, but in when I look at the world news, and I look what's been happening with it's happening right now again in the COVID-19 and Omicron and the vaccines. Is it is it real? Is it not real? And should you get vaccinated? And the kind of 2 truths and a lie. It's I have to read that content from multiple sources, not just one source. And so I think if we were to look at the flying car analogy, and if you read an article in an aviation magazine, which has really strong aerospace and engineering background, the article is probably going to have a very different perspective, a very deep dive on the sum of its parts. Now, if you read the same article and it's in it's some, I'm going to say more like New York Post, which is a little, it's a little, I'd say more controversial and more of a, I don't know, it's not the Wall Street Journal, but that way. But New York Post is great for many reasons. But bringing a product to market and putting it in the New York Post, or putting it into some publication that doesn't have that same level of credibility, I would probably want to read multiple articles to draw, do I need a flying car, right? There's a lot of discussion on the Hyperloop and whether or not we need the Hyperloop, this high speed, I'm going to call it roadways, for the future. I've been on the Autobahn. I think it's something that makes sense. I don't know if the Hyperloop makes sense yet because I haven't seen it. It's not tangible, but the idea of it and being efficient and being increasing in the profitability and the speed for like supply chain and goods around the world. So, maybe an international Hyperloop makes sense, but I don't know. I'm not the expert or the authority on that, but I do question those things, and I read. And so think places, resources that I read that I trust in reading the content, and that the education was behind it was like popular science and popular mechanics and the IEEE spectrum. These are really kind of gritty engineering and geeky publications, I guess I would say. But Wired Magazine looks, takes deep assessments of looking at technology, but the intersections of technology and business and human. But at the same time, I look at publications, like Canary Media, which is all about the future, of an environment and how we live. Sierra Club and Natural Mother Jones and those types of. At an international level, I go to Financial Times and the BBC and those types of sources. But I think, these are just my personal publications of passion that I like to read. And I think we should all be questioning before you spend, I don't care if it's $19.99 or $199 on a product, do your homework, go online, go to CNET, go to, whatever newspaper or magazine that you trust that ally to, for that confidence in buying. I think that's really important as a consumer. Peer pressure, for the younger generation is definitely something that, that's become the norm. But in social media, I can't trust social media or any more than I can trust any of the apps that basically have reviews, because you and I don't know who wrote those reviews.
Absolutely. Donna, it's been wonderful speaking with you so far. If people want to find out more about you and your work, what's the best place they can go to find out more?
Oh, a couple of places. My LinkedIn is probably the most popular place people connect with me. That's just Donna Loughlin, and that's Loughlin. Also, my podcast Before It Happened, which focuses on the futurists and the visionaries in the future. I can't even know what it. Sorry, focuses on the future and the visionaries that imagine the future and the change. A lot of what we just talked about today is what the podcast is about. And I have scientists and doctors and aerospace engineers and innovators. And I say only 20% of them are really my clients. The others are just scientists and amazing people that I meet through my travels. And then LMGPR.com, which is the PR agency, LMGPR.com, which stands for Leadership, Momentum, and Growth. And that's ultimately what I help these innovators and visionaries achieve over time.
Perfect. I'll make sure to get all of those links down in the description below. Donna, it's been wonderful speaking with you, and I look forward to speaking again with you soon.
Great. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Thank you so much for listening. If you liked it, please like, share, and subscribe, and leave me a comment about what you thought and what you'd like to see more about. If you want to take your creativity and innovation capabilities to the next level, then invest in yourself with the premium training only available at ideatovalue.com. These exclusive training modules have all been put together by me, Nick Skillicorn, and have been used by thousands of artists, innovation leaders, and CEOs to become better at understanding the source of their creativity and executing on their innovation ambitions. And there is no risk to you, as they are backed by our money-back guarantee. Now, don't forget to go out there and make your ideas a reality. See you again soon.